Mikoriza. Released in 2022, Mikoriza is a free horror visual novel created by Fulminus Ictus, known for weaving discomfort into visual storytelling. It doesn't tell one neat tale. Instead, it threads 3 interconnected stories, each dipping into body horror, surreal landscapes, and characters who are forced to confront changes they can't reverse. The art style is sharp, almost clinical in its black and white contrast, which makes every warped detail stand out. One story follows a character trapped in a shifting city where the streets loop into themselves and familiar faces appear wrong, stretched, or incomplete. Another involves a workplace routine that begins to fracture as something inhuman hides beneath the rhythm of daily tasks. And threaded through all of them are fungal motifs, spores, growths, and networks that connect the characters' experiences in ways they can't fully see. The pacing is deliberate. Instead of throwing you into monsters or violence, the stories start normal, almost bland. But as each scene continues, the reality bends. Rooms feel smaller, bodies feel unstable, and thoughts become unreliable. By the end, the reader is left not with answers, but with an aftertaste, as if the stories themselves were infections, spreading slowly across your memory. That's the heart of Mikoriza. Its horror doesn't come from a single creature or jump scare. It comes from the way it mimics fungal growth, quiet, persistent, and inevitable. You don't notice the change until it has already taken root, and when you put it down, you realize the unease isn't gone. It's still spreading in the back of your mind. Omen Exitio, Plague. Back in 2018, Tiny Bull Studios released Omen Exitio, Plague, a Lovecraftian gamebook-style visual novel that feels like stepping into a pulp adventure from the early 1900s. You play as Dr. Jake Huntington, a military doctor haunted by loss and regret, who finds himself swept into a global conspiracy that begins with whispers of a spreading plague. The format mirrors a choose-your-own-adventure novel. Pages of text appear with branching choices, each leading you deeper into political intrigue, occult discoveries, and the slow realization that the disease you're chasing is not natural. The infected seems to carry intelligence, bending human will, spreading cult-like devotion in the shadows. What begins as a medical mystery quickly swells into something more cosmic, with every answer leading to a deeper question. The writing does most of the heavy lifting. Instead of cinematic graphics or elaborate animation, Omen Exitio builds its dread through text descriptions and stark illustrations. A dark alley isn't just drawn, it's described in a way that lets your mind fill in the rot, the stench, the lurking figures who vanish when you look too closely. The branching paths let you choose whether to be cautious, reckless, or skeptical, but every choice pushes you closer to forces you cannot control. And what makes this novel resonate as cosmic horror is its inevitability. The plague itself feels like a metaphor for Lovecraft's unknowable truths. Unstoppable, uncaring, spreading across borders no matter how desperately you try to contain it. You don't conquer it, you don't cure it. At best, you uncover how powerless you were from the start. And that's where the horror lingers, in the knowledge that the story you've just read isn't about saving the world, it's about realizing the world was never yours to save. The Whisperer in Darkness. In 2016, an interactive adaptation of Lovecraft's The Whisperer in Darkness was released, bringing one of his more unsettling stories into visual novel form. You step into the role of Professor Wilmarth, a folklorist who begins corresponding with a man named Henry Akeley in rural Vermont. Akeley claims strange creatures lurk near his home, moving through the forests at night, leaving tracks that no human could have made. The story builds almost entirely through letters and conversations, just as Lovecraft originally wrote it. At first, Wilmarth is skeptical, brushing off the claims as superstition, but the more he reads, the harder it becomes to dismiss. Akeley describes buzzing voices, unnatural lights, and the sense of being watched by something that isn't bound by human limits. Eventually, Wilmarth travels to Akeley's remote farmhouse, and the descent begins. There are no branching paths, no alternate endings. Instead, the novel forces you through the same inevitability that defines Lovecraft's original. Wilmarth finds himself alone in the house, listening to Akeley speak from the shadows, his words strangely distorted. The truth, when it comes, is not a spectacle, but a realization. The voice he trusted is no longer human. The adaptation works by leaning into atmosphere over choice. The slow pacing and restrained design emphasize the core of the tale, that doubt can only hold out for so long before evidence corrodes it. By the end, Wilmarth isn't a hero or a survivor. He's a witness, trapped by knowledge that he can never forget. And the reader is left with the same weight, knowing that the voices in the Vermont hills may still be out there, waiting to be heard again. Hermitage, Strange Case Files. Released in 2021, Hermitage, Strange Case Files places you inside a quiet bookstore that hides far more than its shelves suggest. You play as the mysterious owner, a recluse with a shadowy past who spends his days observing customers and reading the strange stories that seem to walk through his door. At first, the cases look like simple tales of troubled people seeking advice, but as you listen, investigate, and dig deeper, each thread leads toward the supernatural. The novel plays out in episodes, each centering on a new mystery. A student worried about nightmares, a professor chasing knowledge he should never have touched, a group of friends stumbling into rituals they don't understand. Conversations branch and overlap, and the bookstore becomes the anchor for all of the stories. As the owner, you're not a hero charging into battle. You're an observer, a guide, piecing together truths from fragments while the darkness outside presses closer. The art direction reinforces the tone. Heavy shadows stretch across the screen, muted colors make every scene feel suffocated, and characters are drawn with subtle unease, as if something behind their eyes doesn't belong. The dialogue is sharp, laced with doubt and paranoia, constantly reminding you that nothing in Hermitage stays simple for long. The strength of Hermitage lies in its framing. Instead of pulling you into one cosmic event, it slowly convinces you that all these cases are connected. Every dream, every ritual, every unexplained disappearance points back to forces that are bigger than the characters themselves. And as the threads tighten, you begin to realize that even the bookstore, this supposed safe space, is part of the same web. By the end, the novel leaves you with the impression that the occult is always just outside the window, waiting to walk through the door, and that the person keeping the records is as trapped by it as anyone else. Frail Hearts, Versicorae Domalion. In 2022, Seges released Frail Hearts, Versicorae Domalion, a hybrid visual novel and JRPG that drops you into the grim city of Greece, a place where reality is thin and personal tragedies bleed into something far darker. Instead of following one protagonist, the story splits between 4 very different lives: a gangster, a nun, a scholar, and a young woman obsessed with books. Each of them is flawed, each of them broken in their own way, and each of them drawn step by step into encounters with things that should not exist. The city itself becomes a character. Greece is cold, oppressive, and constantly changing. Streets lead into blind corners, conversations twist into confessions, and violence hangs in the air like fog. Within this setting, the 4 stories unfold, sometimes brushing against one another, sometimes running parallel, but always leading toward revelations that suggest the same hidden truth. The world they inhabit is being corroded by something ancient, and the corruption is finding its way inside them. The visual style is stark and painterly, often leaning into surreal imagery when characters confront abominations. Fights with monsters are not just obstacles, they're extensions of the characters' inner struggles. Each encounter feels like a reflection, the gangster facing the consequences of his brutality, the nun clashing with faith that no longer protects her, the scholar torn between reason and obsession, and the bookworm dragged into stories that reshape her understanding of reality. You see, the power of Frail Hearts is in how it ties personal pain to cosmic intrusion. These characters aren't random victims, they're people already frayed at the edges, which makes them easier prey for forces beyond human scale. By the time their paths converge, you realize the real battle was never about defeating monsters in the streets of Greece, it was about resisting the inevitability of collapse. And in true Lovecraftian fashion, that resistance is fragile at best, because once you glimpse the truth, there's no going back. Cthulhu Mythos ADV, Lunatic Whispers. October 2022 saw the release of Cthulhu Mythos ADV Lunatic Whispers by Gotcha Gotcha Games, a visual novel that blends classic Japanese adventure storytelling with TRPG-style mechanics. Instead of simply reading through dialogue and scenes, you're pulled into dice rolls, skill checks, and branching investigations, as if the story itself were a tabletop session slowly unraveling into madness. The setting is an abandoned hospital, a place of sterile halls and rotting decay, where every room feels like it has held secrets too long. You move through it step by step, encountering other survivors, strange documents, and inexplicable phenomena that all point towards something lurking beyond comprehension. The mechanics add tension. Every time you roll the dice to attempt a check, you know failure could mean losing reason, drawing attention to yourself, or stumbling into something that was better left undiscovered. The story's progression is deliberately fragmented. Information is scattered across journals, overheard conversations, and symbols that appear on the walls. Characters, like the player, are unreliable narrators, never fully sure if what they've seen was real or the product of fraying sanity. The atmosphere is less about sudden shocks and more about the slow certainty that nothing in the hospital is coincidence. Every locked door, every shadow in the corridor is part of a larger design. Lunatic Whispers stands out because of this balance between narrative and mechanics. Instead of simply telling you that madness spreads, it lets you feel it in the uncertainty of the dice. Each roll carries the weight of the inevitability, each failed check another reminder that knowledge is dangerous. By the end, the hospital doesn't feel like a setting you explored, it feels like a labyrinth that used you to tell its story. Tsui no Sora. Originally released in 1999 by Karo Q, Tsui no Sora is one of the earliest works written by SCAG, later known for the cult classic Subarashiki Hibi. It's a Denpa-style visual novel, a subgenre that thrives on disorientation, paranoia, and psychological collapse. Rather than focusing on monsters or rituals, the horror unfolds through characters who slowly lose their grip on reality, dragging the reader down with them. The story follows Yukito Minakami, a high school student whose life begins to spiral after a classmate's suicide. At first, his world feels ordinary: school corridors, classroom chatter, friendships caught in routine. But the tone shifts quickly. Conversations start to fracture, his classmates' behavior grows erratic, and ideas of conspiracies and cult-like thinking spread among them. What should be the safe backdrop of adolescence turns into a stage for unraveling minds. The visual novel does not hand the player neat answers. Instead, it overwhelms with dense dialogue, sudden tonal shifts, and surreal imagery. Characters speak in circles, obsess over contradictions, or spout cryptic philosophies that leave you unsure what's real. The more Yukito tries to make sense of events, the less stability the narrative offers. It becomes clear that the collapse is not just happening to him, it's happening to the entire world he inhabits. What makes Tsui no Sora so enduring in the Denpa tradition is how it uses atmosphere instead of spectacle. Horror here is not a monster in the dark. It's the sense that reality itself is untrustworthy. The classroom may look the same, but the rules governing it no longer hold. By the time the story closes, you're left with the unsettling sense that normal life can unravel at any moment, and that the line between sanity and madness is far thinner than you ever imagined. Sucker for Love, Date to Die For. Released in April 2024, Sucker for Love, Date to Die For is the sequel to First Date, once again developed by Akabaka and published by Dread XP. Where the original game leaned into parody and comedy while flirting with cosmic horror, this follow-up takes the formula further, layering in a stronger narrative while keeping its mix of romance, ritual, and absurdity intact. This time you play as Stardust, a new protagonist investigating mysterious disappearances in their hometown. The search begins like a standard visual novel mystery, but quickly collides with cultists, dark rituals, and the introduction of a new eldritch love interest, Roxanne, a goat-like deity whose presence is both charming and terrifying. The game branches into multiple routes, each one balancing moments of lighthearted dating sim parody, with the heavy atmosphere of a world slowly unraveling under supernatural influence. Visually, the style is bold and exaggerated, resembling a 90s anime aesthetic with bright colors and expressive character art. But beneath the playful tone, the horror always bubbles up. Choices carry real consequences, and missteps in ritual or dialogue often end with brutal outcomes. Every encounter with Roxanne reminds the player that affection for a cosmic being isn't harmless fun, it's an invitation to lose yourself in something far greater and more dangerous. Date to Die For succeeds because it expands the scope of the original idea without softening the edges. The humor keeps the player engaged, but the underlying horror, cults, obsession, and the futility of trying to balance human life with divine affection keeps the experience grounded in cosmic dread. By the time the endings play out, you're left with a story that feels both ridiculous and deeply unsettling. Proof that even parody can't strip away the weight of the unknown. And that brings us to the end of part 2. If you want something short and unsettling, The Whisperer of Darkness captures Lovecraft's voice with eerie faithfulness, but if you prefer cosmic dread wrapped in absurd romance, Sucker for Love proves that even parody can leave you uneasy when the lights go out. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, share your favorite cosmic horror visual novel in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.